Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So as we look around the world today, it seems like it's just gotten more and more difficult to make sense of everything. Everything has become fragmented and is just kind of burst into a million pieces. Even the so-called MAGA movement, which, back around the election or, let alone, 2020 seemed so united. I'm seeing this movement is being splintered into 1,000 different pieces. I won't even get into it, but it's just that it's so difficult to try to make sense of what's going on. And then you start bringing in the Middle East and Israel and Iran and Europe and the banking system. And I find that when you try to piece all these things together, they don't fit, or at least it's not a puzzle that I can understand. And so joining us today is Martin Armstrong, someone that has really built his entire career off of looking at these puzzle pieces and seeing exactly where they fit in. But what's interesting is that he has a unique tool. It's the ability to understand and analyze the currency flow. And that's what we'll get into in this discussion today, how you can look at what's happening in the world and understand so much of why things are happening just through looking at the flow of currency. But you can't just it's not just you understand what's currently happening, you can understand what's coming next. And that's what's really made a name for Martin Armstrong, is his ability to predict what comes next by looking at currency patterns, looking at the rise and fall, looking back into history and seeing what are the cycles that we've been seeing and where are we at in these cycles and what's coming next. So if you're not familiar with Martin Armstrong, I highly recommend you go look him up and watch some other interviews with him to give you more background. But he really is an absolute genius, and what he's done is extremely impressive. And as you'll see in this conversation, he's consulting the central banks, world leaders, speaking at the BIS conferences. So he has a pretty unique perspective on global affairs. And in this interview, he'll be sharing a lot of that perspective and understanding how to make sense of this absolutely insane world around us. So enjoy the interview with Martin Armstrong. So you've heard me talk about macrobiotic seasonal eating, how aligning your diet with the seasons and eating real, local food can transform your health. But what do you do when your body's out of balance? That is where sweet wheat comes in. Sweet wheat is 100% certified organic wheatgrass juice powder, cold juice and freeze-dried to retain all the live enzymes and nutrients that your body craves, especially when you're dealing with too much acidity from processed food, sugar, or just stress. Just one scoop gives you the alkalizing power of over 1.5 pounds of vegetables, helping to reduce inflammation, improve digestion, support detox, and balance your body's pH all the way that nature intended. It's vegan, non-GMO, gluten-free, and made right here in the good old US of A. So it's safe for all ages, even for kids and pets. You can get sweet wheat from Brightcore for 25% off with the code MANINAMERICA at mybrightcore.com/maninamerica or call 888-575-6488 for up to 50% off and free shipping, but only when you call. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic and understand how sweet wheat supports macrobiotic principles, go watch my recent full interview with the Brightcore founder, Kim Bright. It'll change the way you think about your food. Just click the link below to check it out. Mr. Armstrong, it's always an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as usual, there's nothing to talk about. There's world peace. There's no world hunger. There's no conspiracies. But in all seriousness, though, you're someone that I consistently find that when I listen to what you have to say about certain regions and war, that you're ahead of most people. Even when, I think we were last time we were talking about all the gold outflows of the gold coming into America from Europe, and everyone's speculating about all the different reasons. Is it going to Fort Knox and all this? But you made it very simple. War is coming to Europe, and the wealthy people know that, and there's capital flight happening. And if you look at where things are at right now, just on the entire world, it just feels like the whole world is like a powder keg, and the fuse is lit, and everyone's looking and say, okay, when's it going to actually, how fast is the fuse going to go? Because if you look at Middle East, Iran and Israel, you look at the U.S. getting pulled into that, you look at even what's happening, currently here with this, there's this fire out in Idaho, I think it is, and there's the first responders are being sniped by somebody that they I guess they claim to have caught him and know who he is, and there's all kinds of things that make it sound really fishy to me. Is this some sort of false flag operation? What's the next thing coming from this? There's just so much happening. You've got Chinese nationals being arrested for sneaking in agro-terrorism, right? Blight viruses that would wipe out crops, and so anyway, with all this going on, how do you make sense of where we're at and where we're going?
Historically, these things seem to be a contagion. And like I've said before, like Rome overthrew its king in 509 BC, and within a few months, Athens overthrows their tyrants and democracy is born. George Washington is inaugurated 1789. The French go, that's a good idea, and they do their revolution. It's almost as if there's something in the air or the water or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. But you just go down the line, and wherever there were old grievances, they all seem to come up at the same time. So like in Thailand, all of a sudden you see a border dispute rising up between them and Cambodia. Pakistan, India, it's China, Taiwan, it's North Korea, South Korea. I mean, it's wherever there had been a dispute. It's like, is those bastards, let's get them again. I don't know what it is, but it just seems to me like it's some sort of contagion that when you start seeing something in one region, it spreads to others. And I mean, the reasons are different historically, but you have philosophical issues. For example, that was Khrushchev, we will bury you, where you have the communism is going to beat out capitalism. So it's more of a philosophical thing, not economic, where he's not going to benefit from it per se. Then you have conquest. I mean, that was like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. It's also why Japan went into Manchuria to get tangible assets, energy, things of that nature, which they didn't have. So you have these primary issues. I mean, I did a report. So you have the other thing is basically the worst of them all is unfortunately what we're seeing in the Middle East is religion. Because historically, there's just no solution to it. It's very deeply rooted. You had so many different things throughout history. In Byzantium, you had them coming up with against anybody that worshipped an icon. You had Protestant versus Catholic. The Protestant Reformation, which still has Ireland split, but as I've said, I've been in Bavaria when they said, "Oh, tomorrow's a holiday." And what's the holiday? We beat the, it's because we won the war. I said, which war are we talking about? And they said, "Oh, we defeated Prussia," because they were Protestant, Bavaria's Catholic. So that's what you really see here, and the danger of the Middle East one, what makes it a completely different category. And I hope Israel, contains itself. You take out the Ayatollah, That's more or less like a Protestant assassinating the Pope. It's about 30% on average of these other countries, Egypt, Jordan, etc., and even Saudi Arabia, are so Shiite. All right, so it's not all one Sunni country or something like that. There's differences. That's been my argument against Bill Kristol and the neocons. Back in the 90s told me, if we take out Saddam Hussein and Assad out of Syria and Gaddafi will bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you out of your mind? This is tribal, okay? They don't see themselves as all Iraqis or Syrian or whatever. And to a large extent, you needed dictators. Why? Because they prevented everybody from killing each other, really. Otherwise, there was always going to be, internal, civil wars, Sunni versus Shiite versus Kurd, and, Jerusalem. I mean, we've heard it all over constantly, and you can look at Tony Blair's apology, which is on YouTube, and he said, taking out Saddam Hussein, we thought we would be freeing them from the oppression of Saddam. And he said we didn't realize we'd be subjecting them to more sectarian violence. You ended up with ISIS cutting off people's heads and stuff. I mean, this is the problem. They judge others by themselves. Why wouldn't they want peace? Because it's religion. Wake up. Don't you understand the differences here? So this idea, General Wesley Clark, you can look on YouTube, his speech from 2007. After 9/11, he went to the Pentagon and he was told they were going into Iraq. And he said, have you connected Iraq? They said, no. This has just been their neocon agenda. Remove these dictators. And they told him they were going to go in and conquer 7 countries. And he disagreed with them. So he heard the same thing that I heard, but I heard it back in the 90s, from Bill Kristol, whose father, Irving, started the neocon movement. And what a lot of people don't realize is that, I grew up there in the Philadelphia area. Netanyahu went to school there. All right. And he used to hang out with the Kristol family. His father taught there, so did Bill's father, Irving, at Penn State. So the problem was that he is a dyed-in-the-hard, in the wool neocon, and so if you look at this, I believe there was there was basically a no confidence motion brought against him, and he won simply by 2 votes. And had he been removed, you wouldn't see war. Okay, so the very next day is when he attacked. So from the neocon perspective, they needed him because they all lost. You had Dick Cheney even endorsing Camilla. They were, from all my sources, they were really behind the assassination attempts of Trump. And I was in Berlin at a meeting in May of last year, and they said, "You really think Trump's going to win?" I said, "The computer says he's going to win hands down. I'm sorry." I said, "But I know these neocons. I've been to dinner with these people. All right. I told them I think they're going to assassinate him." And they said, "Oh, come on." Thought I was conspiracy theory. And then after that, they go, "Holy shit, you really know these people, don't you?" I said, "I've been to dinner with them." Okay. You don't see a warm light in their eyes. You really just don't.
So real quick, that you think Folks, summer's here. It's time to relax and hit that refresh button. But if stress, sleepless nights, and sore muscles are getting in the way, CB Distillery has got you covered. CB Distillery's 4th of July sale is on, and you can save up to 50% site-wide with the code RUMBLE. So I'm a big fan of the Relief Balm, which is really good if you've got a sore neck or sore muscles. CB Distillery's got plant-based solutions for just about everything. Better sleep, relaxation, mood, and focus, even pain after exercise. It's all made with premium hemp grown right here in the U.S. There's no fillers, no artificial ingredients. And that is why over 2 million people trust CB Distillery. The 4th of July sale is the perfect time to stock up and save up to 50% off with code RUMBLE. And if you haven't tried CBD, there's no better time. So visit cbdistillery.com and use my promo code RUMBLE. That's cbdistillery.com with promo code RUMBLE. cbdistillery.com. Basically, your source is that as much as the kind of the narrative they're pushing is that a lot of these assassination attempts go back to Iran, which is probably true. There are probably some Iranian cells. I mean, it's no, kind of secret that the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians, have issues with America. Or it's okay. But when you say that the neocons are behind that, do you think that it was a lot of these neocons here, but also do you think that Israel was involved? Because you mentioned Netanyahu, right? Do you think that
I don't know if Israel was involved, but I do know that they did everything they possibly could to prevent him from, coming to power. I don't see, Putin is doing it. Putin understands that dealing with Trump is far better than dealing with the rest of them. Trump understood after the first time. And as you know, I used to be part of the vetting process for who wanted to be president. They would send me in, they explain how the world economy really works. And then it was more or less saying, do you think they're smart enough to understand? And then I was told to go in and meet with Bush Jr. They said, oh, this one's different. I said, what's different? And he said, oh, no, he's really stupid. And I was shocked. And I said, why would you make somebody a stupid president? And I was told he's got the name so we can win. And I was asked to be to take the chief economic advisor in the White House at that time. And I said, no, sorry. As I own my own company. Sorry. People don't understand what the real gig is down there. Why do these heads of Goldman Sachs come in and take these positions? Because to take the position, you can't have a conflict of interest. So you must sell your stock. Because you must sell the stock to take that position in government. It's tax-free. So you get to sell $500,000 or a few $100 million worth of stock that you had tax-free. You're there for a couple of years. Oh, I have a headache. Sorry, I got to leave. So that's the way Washington really works. Everybody, greases everybody else's hand. And so I said, sorry, not interested. I knew other people, Steve Moore, who Trump had offered a position on the Federal Reserve. Steve would have been very good, and immediately started attacking his family, and he withdrew his name. This is, Washington is very, very nasty. And they don't care about anything. You look at some of the Supreme Court justices. Oh, some girl that, I think he wanted to rape me in high school. And then it turns out she never even went there. It's just incorrigible. I mean, what they do. It's all about power and whatever. But so the neocons, this is, when they got there, I know, I won't mention the names, but I know who they are, and they picked the cabinet. All right, they stuck in John Bolton, they stuck in all these people, because I was actually asked. All right, so I know who was doing it. So this time when Trump went in, he picked his cabinet before he even got to Washington. That was a shot across the bow. You're not going to do this to me again. Every person they stuck in there was basically stabbing Trump in the back, from John Bolton, you name it. And look at the Biden administration. You had three people. You had Garland, who brought all the charges against Trump. You had Victoria Nuland, who was handing out sandwiches in Ukraine, in Maidan. And then you also had John McCain standing on the stage over there. Overthrow your government, we stand with you. I mean, and Blinken, who's the one who divided the world economy by putting sanctions on Russia. And then threatened China. If you help them, we'll do this to you. Really? You people want war, you have to sell debt. They own 10%. Okay, how are you going to do this? They don't understand the world economy at all. That's why they used to send me in to see if there was a light on with these people. They don't understand that we are all connected. We really are. Whatever happens in Europe does impact us here. For example, the U.S. was virtually bankrupt. J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail out the Treasury in 1896. It was World War I and II that made the United States the financial capital of the world. All the money came here. So it's not something that our domestic politicians said, gee, if we do this, we'll be the biggest in the world. Never happened. It was Europe blowing itself up, twice, no less. And they think a third time is going to be a charm, I guess. I don't. But this is the real problem. And you have these people that gravitate to power. You have these three people, Garland, Victoria Nuland, and Blinken, all claiming they're from the Ukraine area, all claiming their families were persecuted by Russians. How do you get three people from the same region, historically, in the Biden administration? It's more than slick. It's, they're really weaseling their ways into these things. And they bring us into war. I mean, it was Blinken that ended up creating BRICS. Once you put sanctions on Russia, then it was a warning to the rest of the world. You do what we tell you to do, or this is what will happen. And so they created BRICS to say, go ahead, we don't care anymore. But they're very arrogant. They're very, they only see their immediate issue. And that's my real problem with these neocons. It's, they don't ever look at the ramifications, and like, okay, fine, they took out Saddam Hussein. Did anybody anticipate ISIS? No. All right, what are they doing now? Oh, well, we take out Iran. Then what? What happens then? They have these sleeper cells all over the place. If you turn it into a religious war, you're going to see civil wars in all the major cities of Europe and in America. Don't you understand what you're doing? They only look at their own, personal agenda. That's it. Look, I've dealt with these people for a long time. Bill Kristol even spoke at one of our conferences back in the 90s. So I at least know what I'm talking about. All right, sounds speculation.
Well, so talking about America, I know that I've had a lot of conversations with you before about the future of America and really the future of the world and what your models are showing. And so I want to dig into that. But before we do, when I say, what are your models showing, or Socrates, for people that aren't as familiar with you or your work, can you just give us the quick overview of what does it mean when Martin Armstrong's models predict something that happens? Like, what are these models?
Basically, my father was a lawyer. I didn't want to become a lawyer. I studied laws. Yeah, all right, fine. He pushed me into computers. And so I did the whole 9 yards. I did the engineering, the software, whatever. So in the 70s, I wanted to go back to trading, really. I just enjoyed the trading in the markets, etc. So I thought, gee, I know how to write a program. Why don't I do this? So I wrote a program to be able to trade and to monitor everything. And as we ended up, ironically, as the biggest in the world because of currency. People ask me all the time, how did you ever do all this? It was, my old assistant used to have one of those stick men with holding the sign on her desk that said shit happens. But I happen to have had a client, Walter Zengerle, who is a senior VP at Franklin National Bank. And fortunately, back in like 1964, my father took the family to Europe for the summer, and so we traveled all over. So that actually taught me about currency. That I had, you had to change currency every time you crossed the border back then. And so Franklin National Bank was the bank that started MasterCard. And it was the first bank that failed in 1974. And it failed because of a 10% move in the Italian lira. And he knew I understood currency. He said, would you come take a look at this? I think we have a problem. So after that, pretty much everything that had anything to do with currency, they said, get that guy that did that one. So I started getting dragged into all these things. We're forming the G5 in 1985. So we had clients all over the world because currency was number one, really, for major multinationals as well as governments. So I, got to meet Margaret Thatcher, etc. We had a client in Lebanon. It was one of the major banks there. And they said, they found a ledger that they had written down the Lebanese pound every day back into the 19th century. Could we make a model? I said, sure, we'll put it in, see what comes out. I put it in, and I thought there was something wrong with the data because it came out and said the country's going to fall apart in 8 days. And I called the client. I said, look, this data's got to be bad, And he calmly said, well, what currency would you recommend? I said, well, it says the Swiss franc. 8 days later, the Civil War began. Then I saw we had a client in Saudi Arabia who was one of the biggest shippers in the Gulf. And he called and he says, Iraq's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? I said, tell me a war's going to start? He says, yeah. So by the time 1998 comes, we were, I stood up in London. We had a conference there in June, and the computer was saying Russia was going to collapse. So that became long-term capital management, etc. That's when the CIA came into us. It was like, all right, we've been following you guys for a long time. They want me to go build a model for them. I said, look, we'll run any study you want, but I'm not going to go down there and build something in some bunker for you. And they said, no, we have to own it. I said, well, it's not for sale. So that ended up starting my confrontation with government pretty much after that. But they were all into it. I mean, we were dealing with a company in Geneva. It was Granadex. And we're getting all kinds of requests for studies on platinum and weird stuff. I said, what's the grain company want with all this? And went to lunch with one of the heads of the top 3 banks. And I asked them, I said, what do you know about Granadex? I'm getting all kinds of strange requests. And he says, Marty, you don't know who they are? I said, no. He says, oh, they're a fund for the KGB. I said, oh, okay, thank you. And I mean, Geneva, I believe, is the reason they came in with Know Your Client. I'd be asked to go. We have a client wants to give you a few $100 million to manage. You go over there, and there's a curtain between you and the other guy, and you can't see who it is. I said, no, this doesn't feel right. I actually ended up managing money for Gaddafi 3 times. And they were all involved in this. I met a bunch of guys that came in, looked like they were Irish, red hair, etc. They were trading markets to make money to buy arms, and they were the counter-revolutionary army for Iran against the Ayatollah back then. They all are involved. Every intelligence agency. This is how they make money. You heard of Iran Contra. They make money to fund things that they can't go to the Congress, or they don't want public what they're actually doing. They're trading markets to do it. So we kind of ended up. Shit just happens. We ended up in a position where getting called in by governments around the world, and it's always the currency that causes it. It's when they were forming the euro, they came to me. I had met with them in '98. It's 87 crash. You name it. I've just been in the middle of absolutely every one of them. And my reflection is because we did currency. And what the model did, I began to see that if you know there's a war coming, you start to move your money in advance. And so for 9/11, the SEC used our stuff to look for who was buying puts on airlines a few days before. The terrorists were doing stuff like that. So it's pretty widespread, really. It's so I've been in. The Hamas attack on October 7th, the defense stocks all started moving a week in advance. Somebody always knows. I don't care what country you're talking about. Somebody always knows. And I've studied it. I had a team. We put together the largest foreign exchange database. They worked in London at the Royal Newspaper Library. They had every newspaper back to pretty much inception, and we're taking down quotes on everything, and then we put it into the computer. You can look on our site. We've published a dollar index back to 1900, so you can see what the dollar really has done to wars, etc. And even with the Roman coins, we all knew that Rome fell. The question was, how? Was it like a 747 coming in for a landing, or was it like a waterfall and just falls apart? It turned out the waterfall just collapsed in just 8 years. But we took all the coins and we had them, basically, checked for the metal content, and then we put out charts on that, and you can see it's just a waterfall that just incredible. But so my I guess desire was, I knew history, and really it was like, why do civilizations rise and fall? And so I would say that was the driving force to put this data together, to actually see how things really do function. And you do have to go back, hundreds of years. You can't just look for the last 6 months. It's and when you do, it comes out, and you begin to see, why wars happen, etc. There are economic reasons, there are philosophical reasons, religious reasons, and how do you solve different ones? But Then you have ethnic issues. That's like Ukraine. They just hate Russians, period. And that goes back, not correctly, but they blame the Russians for the starvation of Ukrainians, but they don't want to admit the fact that Kaganovich was the guy from Kiev. He was Jewish, and he was Stalin's right-hand man. And when he said, because they confiscated all the land, communism, and then it's like putting somebody in DMV in charge of planning stuff. Didn't work out very well. So to pretend that communism was actually working, they stole the food from Ukraine. And most serious people look at this, and since he was born in Kiev, and Ukrainians were even more ruthless against the Jews than the Germans, many people believe that it was a retribution for the persecution of the Jews that they had pulled off, and who knows what the real motive was, but that's basically what a lot of people assume. But he was Jewish, and he was born in Kiev, and he was the one in charge of taking all the food. So it wasn't really even a Russian. And Stalin wasn't Russian; he was from Georgia, anyhow. All right. I can tell you, in Russia, there's always been a question: is who's actually Russian? So. You have just a lot of different ethnic groups and all as part of one country. And even if you look at Rome, there was an emperor, Philip I, around 250 AD, and they call him Philip, the first, the Arab, because he was born over in Syria, and he becomes the emperor of Rome. So you see that people, the emperors were no longer just from Rome or Italy or something like that. They came from different places, Spain, whatever. So they had pretty much the same sort of issue. Who's really Roman? Are they? You have Roman citizenship, but you're not bloodline Roman. So, this is the way history is. And Russia was not much different from that perspective. Many different ethnic groups. And that is what has sparked the debates in Russia for a long time. Who's really Russian?
And so looking at America and what your models are telling us, so Trump he's come out, he has this masterful ceasefire, peace to the Middle East, peace to America. America's entering into a golden age. And there's a lot of rhetoric and discussion about that. But when I look around, and I also just gauge my own gut feeling, America seems like it's teetering on the edge of chaos. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer and whatnot, but it doesn't seem like we're entering into some period of just grand prosperity and peace. Actually, it seems almost the opposite. But what are you seeing? What are your models showing you for what, say, the next 5 years in America could potentially look like?
It looks as though we're in this period of a political revolution where, as I said, we've seen this many times throughout history. Rome overthrows its king. Athens goes, that's a good idea. We overthrow monarchy. France says that's a good idea. This time it's religion. I mean, not religion. It's more of a republic. That they tell us we live in a democracy, but we do not. We're never asked any relevant questions. Shall we go to war with Russia? Yes or no? Nobody asks us. They just do whatever they want to do. And it was Mark Twain that said if voting really mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. And so it unfortunately we have republics tend to be the most corrupt form of government, period. You have, I mean, just look in Europe, they're talking about the kickbacks between Ursula and Pfizer. People are demanding that really she should step down. This is the problem with the republic. I could run for office and say whatever you want to hear. Vote for me, I'll save the whales, I'll make sure it doesn't rain on Thursdays, whatever you want me to say, right? Then I get there and I go, congratulations, and this is how it works, all right? The ideas are made up in the back room, and then just look at the votes. They're down party line. You're told how to vote, all right? They don't represent us. It takes somebody with courage to stand up against it. And then what they do to them is the Speaker of the House has way too much power. He decides who's going to be on what committee. If you don't play ball, you don't get on any committee. You can't make a motion on the floor. All motions must come through a committee. So they have ways of basically shutting you down. And I've seen this over the years. And John Boehner, basically, when he was Speaker of the House, he couldn't deliver there were about 80 people in the Tea Party that were elected. And they refused to go along with him. But there were enough of them that they could stand up. And so what he did, he started removing anybody that supported him from any financial committee. And this is the way Washington works. When I brought this up, they can't. The Speaker can no longer do that. I said, okay, fine. You changed the rules again. Unfortunately, I think we're looking at the demise of this type of system, and it's pervasive. It's everywhere. I would like to see if the computer showing this is coming to a head, by around 2032, and after that, my hope is that we move more towards a direct democracy. Kind of like, I know people go, that can be bad. Just look at Switzerland. They come up with a referendum, and it has to have so many signatures before people will vote on it. And I think that's a much better way of going about some things. And they tend to take the arguments against democracy from some of the Greek philosophers that were against democracy, but they felt that the average person on the street was too stupid to know what he was voting on. And this is the attitude that they look at us at. And so they get to do what the hell they want to do anyhow. And they really don't know how things function globally. If they did, they wouldn't be calling me in a different. I get called into all these crises, and I told you not to do this. I just sent a letter out to Trump, for example. It's always the same scenario, and you as an individual. Your parent tells you don't stick your finger in that candle, it's going to hurt. You still do it. Now you felt that sucker was hot. Okay, you don't do it again. Government is incapable of that because it changes all the time. So there is no collective memory. All these, a crisis comes in and somebody steps up, this is the solution. I've never yet heard, and I've been dealing with them for over 40 years. A simple question. Has anybody tried this before? Did it work? Never asked. Never. And look, we became, I guess, pretty famous after the 87 crash because I was called in for the G5 and they were saying they were going to lower the dollar by 40% so they could sell more widgets offshore. Sounds nice. But this is what I mean. They do not know what they're talking about. I wrote a letter to the president. I said, if you do this, you're going to cause a crash in 2 years. Oh, why? Because you sold a third of the national debt to the Japanese. You're now going to say you're going to lower the dollar by 40%. You're going to sell. Why would they sell? Because they're going to lose money. So I got called into the 87 crash. You can look at the Brady Commission report. At the very end, the best I could get them to say, we think foreign exchange has something to do with it. That's it. They're never going to blame the government, all right? But you lower the dollar by 40% so you can sell more widgets. You're devaluing U.S. assets to everybody else in the stocks, real estate, whatever. From the foreign perspective, they lose money. I was in London in 1985 when the pound fell down to par. The Brits thought Americans were crazy. Everybody's in there buying property, and it's at the highest price. They're crazy. No, it was the fact that the pound had fallen from 240 to par. Okay, I even went into British Airways because the Concorde was flying back then. I asked them, I said, how many tickets could I buy? They looked at me like, what? I said, how many, open-ended, tickets could I buy in the Concorde? It would cost me $1,000. They gave me like 25. I said, okay, fine, I'll take them. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but then I went to get on the Concorde. It was completely full with Americans. Because when it started, it was 3,000 pounds, basically, and it was more than a first-class ticket out of New York City. So it was really expensive. But when the pound fell from 240 to par, it was dirt cheap. It was cheaper than a first-class ticket. And I got on there, and everyone... it was full of Americans. Everybody goes, this is really a great deal, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. But they don't understand currency.
Hey, folks, I've got a quick but really important update. So right now, DC politicians are trying to kill the very tax credits that are helping bring manufacturing back from China and putting American workers on the job. These credits are fueling U.S. energy independence, rebuilding our supply chains, and hitting the Chinese Communist Party where it hurts. And look, this isn't theory. It's actually happening. We're talking real factories, real jobs right here on American soil. But if they repeal these credits, we're going to lose millions of jobs. We got over $1 trillion from our economy, and we hand China a massive win. So here's the deal. President Trump, don't let Congress pull the plug on America's comeback. Stand firm. Protect the energy tax credits. Keep putting America first.
And if you understand currency, this it changes everything. In the 70s, the Germans were pricing their cars in Deutschmark. Okay, so from the American perspective, you could buy a German car, drive it around for 2 years, and you'd sell it for more than what you paid for. Because pricing it in Deutschmarks to Americans, as the dollar is going down, it was always going up in value. So that's what gave Germany the image that their cars were the best. All right. And if you understand the currency side, it's very, very simple. I mean, with Toyota, etc., the Japanese, I helped them. I said, look, you want to compete against the Germans? This is how we do it. We price it in dollars and take the currency home to manage. Okay? And that's how Japan beat Germany. Then I got called in by the Germans. They go, would you do this for us than what you did to the Japanese? Yeah, okay, fine. when you're getting into currency moves at 20, 30, 40% in a couple of years, it changes everything. Absolutely everything. I was involved with all the takeover boom in the 80s, and people didn't understand, they made the movie Wall Street, and they didn't understand what we were doing. I went bought all the Courage pubs in England. Okay, I said, all right, fine. We borrowed the money in Swiss franc. So you borrow in a currency that's going to decline against the asset. We were making more money on the currency moves than we were on the assets. So this is why we got dragged into everything globally. It was, we understood currency, the model was tracking capital flows. And what I noticed when I was in Geneva, for example, we were all dealing with the OPEC money in the early 80s. Then you started to see the capital started shifting to Japan. And Japan then peaked in 1989 at the end of the decade. But the money was flowing there, but also the talent. So some of the best brokers I knew in Geneva had moved to Tokyo. So I could see, for example, even when Greece got in trouble in 2010, the traders go, oh, okay, who's next? Oh, Spain. They start attacking those currencies, all right? This is the way capital really works. So the model basically that I developed track capital flows internationally so I could see where it's going next. And I never intended it to predict wars. But then began to see that terrorists were definitely using events to make money to fund the next one.
And what are you seeing with the capital flows in America? Because you say that these capital flows predict what's coming. So with where things are at right here, stock market's at all-time high. There's all these interesting things happening. But what are you seeing? Like, what's the money doing? Like the big money doing in America, right? Where we still have the dollar, the world reserve currency. All this is still relevant here. But you see people like, Jamie Dimon, for instance, selling off massive amounts of his stocks. You see Berkshire Hathaway sitting in, if I'm not mistaken, their largest cash position in history. So what are these signs telling you about, life home in America?
Most of those, they really do not understand the global implications. They're just looking at this from, it's an all-time high, like pull out the charts from 1929. It all depends. You get war going on in Europe, which they are pushing very hard. Then you got to be out of your mind to keep anything there. What will happen is Europe always puts in capital controls. Just look at the charts from World War I. What did they do? They shut down all the stock markets. So you couldn't sell anything, and your money would get trapped. This is what they routinely do. The dollar, about 70% of dollars paper dollars are outside the country. Why? Because the United States is the only country that has not canceled its currency. Even Canada canceled its $1,000 bills, its high denomination. Europe, routinely, they're very socialistic. So they routinely cancel their currency, Britain, all of them. So you can't have a few $100,000 in cash and stuff it in a safety deposit box. It's something worthless, all right? It forces you to come out. And then they go, oh, really? Where'd you get this from? Did you pay your taxes? The problem with Europe is definitely that they are looking at this from they want war because they're seriously in trouble, and I dealt with them. And let me try and shut this off here. But when they were forming the euro, I explained, look, you have to consolidate the debt. They were saying, oh, everybody will pay the same interest rate. I said, oh, this is bullshit. Not going to work. All right, we have a single currency. You got 50 states. They all pay different rates according to their credit rating. All right, you're comparing it to the federal government only. All right, and to do that, you have to consolidate the debt, create a European federal debt. All right, and Herman Kohl was against that. He didn't allow the Germans to vote to go into the euro, and he even admitted before he died that he acted like a dictator. And he said if he had allowed the Germans to vote, he would have lost 7-3. So the problem with the euro is that it has never been able to compete with the dollar. And we're reaching that point right now where we saw it in Greece. When one member gets in trouble, it turns into a contagion that affects everybody else. So if California went down, we wouldn't be, panicking and selling federal debt. You might sell Utah or Washington State or something like that, but you're not going to go sell federal. So the problem with Europe is that one gets in trouble, they can take down all of them. And they know this. When I warned them, they said, look, we understand. They said, we just have to get the euro through so they could create the bureaucracy first. And they said, we'll worry about the debt later. Here we are, 26 years later. They haven't done anything. All right. So the problem that we're facing here is that they need war. And the main reason they need war is because it's a cascade of absolute errors. About 70% of pension funds must have government debt. A default government debt, you lose all your pension funds. The bank reserves must have government debt. Now they can hold debt of all the members. So then you get one member in trouble and everybody's going to say, oh, which bank has the biggest holding? And start shorting that bank. This is the way capital will act. And an example of this, the German hyperinflation. What really caused it was in December 22, the German government confiscated 10% of everybody's assets. You're hearing Ursula talking about the same thing. Unused money, to fund the war. All right, go ahead. Watch what happens to Europe. Because Germany did that in December 22, capital fled like crazy. They started moving accounts to every other currency but Germany. So the hyperinflation then starts in 23. It had nothing to do with printing money. It had the fact that they confiscated 10% of your assets in the bank. I think if they did that today, you're going to go, should I leave the rest of it there? You're going to move it. All right. This is why in 1933, when Hitler comes to power, what did he do? He issued a law that was against the law to have a foreign bank account. He was trying to bring back all the money. You couldn't have a foreign bank account without government permission. Then what happens? Switzerland decides and creates the numbered account secrecy system in 1934. So it's all connected. So when you lose confidence in the government state, the capital will flee. And that's what's been coming over here already. All right. One, paper dollars are being held in Russia, they're being held in China because they know, one, they're a hedge against their own governments, but two, they won't be canceled. They can't hold euros. They won't even hold Canadian. All right. So that's part of the reserve currencies of the United States. You have these people talking about, oh, the debt. Really? Okay. The interest that we are spending to keep rolling the debt is currently at 1.9% of GDP. You want to run into BRICS? Okay. Who's the highest? Brazil, 8.5%. We are the strongest because we also have the largest economy. And we have a consumer-based economy. So everybody's got to price their Toyotas, the BMWs in dollars to sell them here. Okay. And so all this talk about, oh, the debt is going to take the dollar down. Very nice. The capitalization of New York Stock Exchange by itself is worth more than all of the exchanges of Europe combined. People have no concept that the United States, as a fund manager, I can pick up the phone and say, buy me, $10 billion worth of treasuries. I can't do that with Europe. I still have to say, gee, do I want Germany? Do I want France? I still make the same decisions as if the euro never existed because they never consolidated. So there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And you get these people domestically, oh, the debt, oh, the Fed. Look, central banks, and I talked to many of them, all right, central banks are in trouble. Why? Because essentially you're talking about the issue of really the whole issue here about the how do we, this philosophy that we can, the government's in control and can manage everything. It's just, it's a crock. I mean, what do you want me to say? I mean, Keynesian economics was established back in the 30s. U.S. had a balanced budget. So yes, you raised interest rates and lowered interest rates, affected us directly. All right. Today, the government is the biggest borrower in the room. So they cannot control inflation. If he raises interest rates to stop inflation, the government interest expenditures go up. So we're in a different ball game. And you can see it and understand it when you step back and look at the whole world. And you get these people that are just myopic. They only look at the Fed. What's the Fed going to do to us next? That's very nice. I did a book back in 86. We hope to republish it eventually. It was called The Greatest Bull Market in History. It taught me a lot because I had to read all the newspapers for the bull market into 29 and the bear market. What were they talking about? What were they thinking about? And the psychology was completely opposite of what we hear today. Interest rates were rising all the way into 29. And stock market rose. Why? They said that proved there was still a demand for money. So it was still bullish. Interest rates declined, went from 6% to 1% in the Great Depression. Market fell 90%. Didn't help. All right. 07 to 09, interest rates went down. Didn't help. Interest rates decline in recessions and depressions. It does nothing. Why? Very simple. If you think the stock market's going to double, you'll pay 20%. If you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you're not going to borrow at 1%. All right. It's a matter of perception. So you can look on our site. I published call money rates back to 1899. And in 1929, that was the lowest level of interest rates. Why? Not the biggest. Because it was capital concentration. Same thing in 1989 in Japan. All the capital was coming to the United States because, first of all, World War I. All right, so it came here, and then they saw the auto boom. It was kind of like the dot-com bubble. So then everybody wanted to be, part of this is the big boom, the Industrial Revolution, blah, blah, blah. All right, so the money was here. Foreigners made a ton of money on this because the dollar was going up. The same thing happened in 1989 in Japan. All right, yen was going up, stock market's going up. So as a foreign investor, I made more than the Japanese did because I benefited also in the currency. All right. So that's what I mean, understanding, stepping back and looking at the world economy. We have, I would make decisions. We had to make decisions what countries, a company should set up operations, things of this nature. That's how I got to meet Margaret Thatcher. I happen to have known her personal economic advisor, Sir Alan Walters, and she had heard this rumor that there's this guy sending companies to Britain, and he goes, "Yeah, that's Marty." "There is a guy? You know him?" He says, "Yeah, I want to meet him." So I went to go meet her. She even spoke at one of our conferences, and I think it was '96 or something. And I explained to her. I said, "Look, I was putting all the companies that needed skilled labor, like auto manufacturers, in Britain." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because in Germany, the social costs on top of paying somebody the very same wage that I would in Britain, all right, is 40% higher." And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yes." Very socialistic. And this is, I'll give you an example. I was called in by one of the largest telecommunication companies in Germany. I was in London. I got a phone call. "We need you here at the board meeting first thing in the morning." I said, "What's up?" They said, "You'll find out when you get here." I get there, they appoint our firm advisor to the pension fund. Then everybody's resigning. I said, "What the hell's going on here? Is this a Harry Carey meeting or something?" And they wanted to lay off 20% of their workforce. The German government initially said, okay. Then at the last minute, "Oh, that's not fair. You can't pick and choose. You have to make this offer." I think it was $150,000 to give up your job voluntarily. All right. So what happened? The people that knew they could get a job across the street took the $150,000 and left. They got stuck with the very people they wanted to fire. All right. So the chairman, he says, he's likewise took the $150,000 and left. I said, "Why?" He says, "I'll never get a job again if my name is associated with this company, which is going to go down the tubes." All right. And I told this story to a board member, and I got called in by the IMF. And I said, look, governments, you can't do this kind of stuff. And I've always, taken the high road with this and tried to at least, straighten it out. And I was actually surprised, but she said to me, she says, "You're right. We discovered this also in Greece. That's what happened." I said, "It's human nature." Okay. If somebody knows they can get a job across the street, they're going to take the money and leave. The guy that doesn't think he can, he's not going to take the money and leave. You can't just come up, oh, that's not fair, equality, all this, complete BS. They don't understand human nature. This is the problem between you had Russian communism versus Chinese. All right, they were actually two different philosophies. Stalin was a paranoid. He was worried about what you thought. Okay, so that's his great purge. In China, it was more of the tall poppy syndrome. We don't care what you say in your private house, what you think, but you stick your head up against, above everybody else is getting cut off. Right? So that was pretty much the two different, I would say, versions of communism. And when you step back and look at this is why China boomed and Russia didn't. Because China didn't get involved in changing the human nature of people. Whereas in Russia, I met people that grew up in East Germany, and they were taught in school that if your parent ever said anything against the state, to report them, because the state is really your parent. This kind of shit. It's so psychologically it was different. We had one client when Germany was unified, and he was going to open a plant in the East. And I warned him. I said, listen, this is not going to work out for you. And he says, no, you don't understand the German ethic. Sorry, these people have never had to work. He didn't listen to me, opened up his plant. Maybe about 3 months later, he called, he goes, sorry, I should have listened to you. It takes 3 Eastern Germans to do the work of one. I said they never had to. You have to understand it's human nature that Stalin really undermined. China didn't do that. So it was different type of philosophy per se. But that's why China boomed very rapidly. Its economy is about to exceed the United States. Russia, no. So it's human nature that does this. It's what it is that I knew a professor at Princeton University, and he said to me that he said, you remind me of Einstein. I said, what? He says, you're curious. And he said, Einstein had said, without curiosity, you discover nothing. And then I understood what he's talking about. I said, because I'm not in physics or something like that, And he says, no, you're curious. You're trying to figure out what makes it tick. He says, that's what Einstein did. It's just a different field. And when I thought about what he was saying, he's correct. That's what communism basically stopped. You weren't allowed to be curious. That's Nixon's kitchen debate with Khrushchev in 1959. See all this? This is what the private sector created. Nobody in government is going to sit there and go, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have a machine to wash dishes so I don't have to do it every day? They're not doing it. All right? So they're not going to see that. And that's what he explained to me. He said, if you're not curious, you will never discover anything, and progress of society will be killed. And it's right. It doesn't matter what the field is. All right. I'm certainly no Einstein when it comes to quantum mechanics and stuff like that. But no matter what the field is, if you're not curious, you can't discover something you already know. That's what the computer really does. I saw the capital flows and how it moves back and forth. So most of the central banks will, contribute to us because they want to know too what the hell's going on. So we track the international capital flows, and it shows both markets as well as geopolitical events. Because obviously, if you do know you're going to invade a country, you're going to move your money accordingly. And with that Bank of Lebanon, they saw the money moving. They probably knew about the rumblings for a civil war. They weren't coming to me for that forecast. They were coming to me for the timing. So it wasn't like, oh, you're going to go into civil war. Oh, my God, really? They already knew that. And like I said, very calmly, said, well, what currency would you recommend? And I was like, huh? Because they already knew they could see it on the ground. And people were moving money, etc. Like we talked about with Germany, moving money outside because the hyperinflation stuff. But that's what will happen. You undermine the confidence, and the capital will move. And the biggest risk you have right now is that Europe is desperate for war. And the more that they keep beating these war drums, the more capital that is moving over here. So a lot of our clients had, gold reserves. I said, you better get it out of there, because when that first bullet is shot, just look at what they did in World War I. They shut down all of the exchanges. You won't get it out. So to Europeans, I tell them, look, you better have an account outside. Because capital controls, they will come down. And this is why they're moving for digital currencies over there. Once they do a digital currency, that's it. You're shut down. You've already had Spain come out and said you can't take more than $3,000 out of an account without, or 3,000 euros out of an account without permission from the government. It's cash. They're scared to death of the money fleeing. And then you have Ursula over there saying, to fund the war, we can, seize private unused assets. Unused. This is nuts. But governments do the same thing all the time. They respond like a cornered animal, and they will fight tooth and nail. I've seen the internal memos of NATO when the money was going to climate change. They're worried. And how do we remain relevant? They only remain relevant by constantly saying, oh, Russia's going to invade Europe. Putin doesn't want to invade Europe. What's he going to get out of it? Walk into France and they're going to say, oh, thank you. You're going to pay our pensions now? That's about it. There's no gold. There's no energy. There's no tangible asset worthwhile going in. All right. You had Hitler. All right. It was to control all of Europe. But Hitler, the other side of him was basically, confiscated all the art, things of this nature, and even the issue against the Jews. You have to understand that there was, it was called the Jewish conspiracy. They viewed that communism was a Jewish conspiracy issue. You had Marx, you had Trotsky, all right, and Lenin wasn't Jewish, but they saw it as that's why they went after really the Jews. The Bundestag, the Reichstag that went fire, blamed it on a communist. Okay, he was Dutch, but it was to beat up this, to justify going into Russia because they're communist. But Russia has been, even Margaret Thatcher, you're going to find on YouTube, she gave a speech. Russia is the richest country in the world. From a natural resource perspective, they've got oil, diamonds, gold, timber, you name it, they have it. The estimates are about $75 trillion in natural resources. This is why you had Napoleon try to conquer it. You had Hitler try, and this is why, I've been told that they call Macron in France the Petit Napoleon, and they really think that if they conquered Russia, Europe would then rise again, like the Roman Empire, be the richest country in the world. U.S. will be the subservient vassal state, but beneath their feet. This is, look, De Gaulle had the same kind of, attitudes. It's been these ethnic hatreds. They go back centuries. When what happened was you had, after World War II, the CIA wanted Europe to band together and create the European community. They funded it. The problem was De Gaulle. And they had to threaten taking away the Marshall Plan funds from France to get him to finally agree. He agreed to take the Germans, but not the British. Why? Because basically, France lost to the Brits at Waterloo. I mean, this goes on forever, really.
I mean, it seems like it's just the same cycle of history over and over and over again. Corrupt governments, millennia-old battles between tribes and races and regions, and it's just the human condition. We feel like America's been here for so long, but it's just a baby in the whole timeline of mankind. And
yeah, it's this is why FDR tried to get us into World War II, and it took Pearl Harbor to do it. Congress wouldn't issue a declaration of war. Americans were not interested because everybody that came here was to get away from that shit, really. I saw a documentary. He was in Boston trying to justify sending troops to help Britain. And Boston's mostly Irish. They said, you really expect us to send our boys over there to defend the Brits after what they did to Ireland? This was pretty much the issue. That's what you get. I mean, Britain wasn't allowed to join the EU until after de Gaulle died. I mean, I was a keynote speaker at the BIS conference in Paris. So I had to sit at the head table with all the heads of the central banks there of Europe. And the table starts speaking English. And the French sitting next to me, he was absolutely beside himself. This is Paris. Should be speaking French. But everybody, the Italian didn't know German, the German didn't, the one language everybody knew was English. I've encountered the same thing in China. Between Japanese and Chinese. They could speak English to each other and nothing outside of that. But he was absolutely livid. I mean, he was like, even when France joined the euro, you can go on eBay and maybe buy one, but the rule was that nobody was allowed to issue a coin celebrating France's loss at Waterloo. Belgium finally did, but as a commemorative issue that wasn't for circulation. It comes in a little card. And Belgium basically did it because they didn't like the French anyhow. De Gaulle said that Belgium was created by the English to annoy the French. So, I mean, these disputes have gone back and forth. I mean, for such a long period of time. That's why I say it seems to be more of a contagion. It's like everybody starts, somebody gets mad at, that's a good idea. I remember them, they did this to us. Well, I don't know, it all just seems to rise. So all of a sudden you see Thailand and Cambodia. Where the hell did that come from? It's like Pakistan, India. I mean, all right, they at least split, over religion. But it's pervasive. It's always the same thing. And I think we have to understand that this is the world we live in. And it's not, as black and white as you might think. And we're often on the receiving end. So just be mindful that some of these guys, they're selling their stuff because they think the market's overvalued. They're not looking at it internationally. If Europe goes in the war, that capital is coming here. All right. U.S. is the only place you can park all that kind of money. As I said, the New York Stock Exchange by itself is worth more than all the exchanges of Europe combined. The IPO of Home Depot was more than all the IPOs of Europe for 10 years. You have no concept of how oppressed Europe really is. And it's all this socialistic ideas. And I mean, I've lived there, and I was in Zurich, and you can go shopping only one night. Stays open to 7:00. That's it. And you ask, well, why can't you be open, so you can go after work, and you got to rush out and buy everything within 2 hours before it closes, and all you Americans think about is just, money, and that's the attitude you get. I said, well, it's not. You have 3 shifts. The third shift comes in, runs it at night. It's not the same people having to stay for 14-hour days, But I just don't get it that way. They really don't. It's
no, the whole thing just seems like a mess. Well, Martin, I have to wrap up because I have another show to record very shortly here. But I want to bring up your website before we do sign off here. It's armstrongeconomics.com. Wealth of information on there. And I appreciate you coming and just sharing these thoughts, because you say it's not black and white. It's so far from being black and white. It's layers upon layers of complexity, and it's so hard to make sense of.
Just everybody will act out of their own self-interest.
Yeah, that's human nature for sure.
Yes, that's human nature. And Europe, when that first bullet starts to fly, you're going to see them coming over here. They did it for World War I. They did it for World War II. This is just the way it is. I mean, if you're over there, I better get out of here, because I'm not sure the bank's still going to be there when the bombs finish, It's interesting times that we live in, that's for sure.
Certainly.
Keeps us on our toes.
That is true. Well, Martin, thank you for giving us an hour and a half of your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Well, I hope it, opens the door a little bit so you can see a crack on the other side. Yeah.
Well, the key is that we're all curious. And that's what's gotten us here, is we're curious about these things.
You don't discover anything unless you are curious.
Yeah.
You can't discover what you know.
Exactly. Well, Martin, thank you again. Take care.
Oh, thank you. Take care of yourself. See you again.
Thank you. You probably think your 401k is safe, that it's growing, that it'll be enough for your retirement. But what if it's not? Here's the truth most people never hear. Your 401k was never designed to make you wealthy. It was created in a corporate boardroom to shift retirement costs and investment risk onto you, designed to keep your money trapped, exposed to Wall Street crashes, inflation, and uncertainty you can't control. Until now. Right now, Americans are taking back control by turning to real assets like gold and silver. Noble Gold Investments has helped thousands protect their future by converting part of their retirement savings into physical gold and silver so they can stop worrying about the market and start sleeping better at night. So talk to Noble Gold today and learn how safe and easy it is to roll over your 401k into a tax-advantaged precious metals IRA without penalties or headaches. Visit goldwithseth.com or call 626-654-1906 to get your free wealth protection kit, including a step-by-step guide to get started. It's time to get your money out of the danger zone and into something real. Again, that's 626-654-1906 or goldwithseth.com.